the concentration camps built by the Japanese. The more beautiful the woman, the worse the outcome. Anna's hands were tied behind her back, and she was kneeling on the ground. The bamboo tubes on her legs were covered with iron spikes. Once she sat her down, her legs would be pierced with blood. Her body was surrounded by sharpened bamboo poles. Once her body fell down, she would be pierced straight through. Her companions could only watch in silence. No one dared to take a step forward. The sun's scorching heat made Anna dehydrated. She was staggering and could not hold on any longer. An old woman couldn't stand it anymore. She tried to give Anna some water but was stopped by the soldiers. Anna could only take a deep breath of despair. She could only struggle to hold on. After a day and a night of exposure to the sun, Anna was shaking even harder. Her lips were dry and cracked, and her skin was sunburned in many places. She could not hold on any longer. Then the Japanese officer's Jack came over. He stood by Anna's side with a blank face and drew his katana. Her companion stared in horror. He slowly placed the sword around Anna's neck and slowly raised it into the air. Why did Anna end up in such a state? Back in time, in a Singapore hotel, everyone was dancing and singing, living a life of luxury. Suddenly, an explosion shatters all this, and officers came on stage and announced that the Japanese had broken through the lines. He asked the women and children to get on board and evacuate immediately. All the men prepared to fight. They hurriedly evacuated on boats overnight, but the evacuated ships were not escorted by any warships. They thought that if they escaped from the Japanese bombing range, everything would be safe. But the desperate Japanese had no intention of letting them go. Multiple planes came after them and started bombing directly. Although the ship had anti-aircraft guns to counterattack, but the Japanese shells were too many and too powerful. In a short time, their ship was damaged in many places and scrapped. Everyone had to abandon the ship to escape. Just as they all went to the deck to escape, the Japanese planes came back. The remaining people did not have time to grieve. They jumped into the water and panicked. 3 women were swept away by the waves. They could no longer see where they were going. They had been floating in the cold water for a day and a night. When they were about to run out of energy, they saw the island ahead of them. They arrived on the island. They walked through the quiet marshes and through the mangroves. They were happy and thought they would be safe soon. But on the way, they encountered a large number of Japanese troops. The island was already occupied by the Japanese. Jack, the Japanese officers, saw them, called them to the car and drove them to the town. They thought they had met a good man, but then they were first beaten up, and then they were taken to a square. Here were all the people from the ship. Then they were taken to a concentration camp. Here, they were held women and children from all over the world. The Japanese hated 3 types of people: Europeans, prisoners, and women. They had all 3 of them. Anna was about to ask a question, but what she got was, not only are they subjected to inhumane abuse here, the food is also leftovers that no stray dog will eat. If they made a mistake, the consequences would be even worse. Inside the Japanese concentration camp, 2 soldiers dragged out a Chinese woman. He was thrown to the ground. She was on her knees and didn't dare to move. The soldiers pressed a stick on her back and told her to get down. She was trembling with fear. The soldier picked up a bucket of gasoline and poured it all over her body from the top of her head. Jack walked up to her, and she didn't dare to breathe. Jack lit a match and threw it on her body. She was burned alive. They wanted to show the crowd what happens when you don't listen. Some were shaking in fear. Others were stunned on the spot. But the reason for all this, it was because in this camp, not only were they fed poorly, they had to do heavy physical work every day like slaves. Joan felt a pain in her back. When she tried to get up to relieve herself, she was reprimanded by the soldiers on the side. In addition to the poor living conditions, some people contracted malaria. The Japanese were only willing to provide red potion and claimed it was a miracle cure for all diseases. But this also meant that the patients were left to die. In order to treat their fellow soldiers, the small Chinese took the initiative and stepped forward. At night, they sneaked through the barbed wire fence and took some valuable things to exchange with the people outside for some medicine. Unexpectedly, a clock suddenly rang. This attracted the attention of the Japanese, although she quickly went back to her room with her petite figure. But the next day everyone was called to the square. Jack took one look and was sure she was the one who did it. He told his men to bring her to the front. Then he set her on fire and killed her. At night, a woman came out of the toilet. The soldier suddenly covered her mouth from behind and tried to rape her. She wasn't afraid. As soon as the soldier let go of her hand, she quickly turned around and punched the soldier down. The soldier fell heavily into the cesspit. He struggled a few times but could not get up. Finally, he was helped up by other soldiers. Then she was put in a bamboo cage for attacking a Japanese soldier. At that moment, Jack arrived with his men. They beat her up. She had several broken ribs. There was no medical equipment or medicine here. All they could do was drink some of the doctor's wine to ease the pain. That day they received a list of all the beautiful young women here. They didn't know what the Japanese were doing, and they were taken to the truck. They all thought they were going to be killed. They were all depressed. The truck came into a compound. Inside was a large, beautiful villa. They were taken to a large room in the villa, where the table was full of fruits and food. The women, who could not get enough to eat every day, were stunned. They couldn't take their eyes off the table. The interpreter told them that this was the Japanese officers' club. They were all well educated and would be gentlemen like Europeans, as long as they are willing to work here. Not only do they have 24-hour hot water for bathing, but they are also well fed and well dressed. They started talking. With the music playing, some didn't want to go back to the camp because she didn't want to starve and be tortured again. She chose to go into the room and stay. Those who didn't stay were taken back to the camp to continue their work. One time when the flag was raised, they saw the Japanese flag. They mocked that they had put up sanitary napkins as flags. They have a lot of imagination. Then the colonel announced that the Japanese had won further victories in the Pacific. European and American imperialists were losing ground, and Australia had been bombed several times. They were asking for peace talks with Japan. The women were very unconvinced. They thought they were talking nonsense. They were lying. Anna's words were overheard by Jack, so she was tied up with her hands and bamboo tips all around her. She was exposed to the sun. When she was about to lose her strength, Jack came to her. Jack raised his knife and cut down. All the people were too scared to open their eyes to see. Then a roll of golden hair fell to the ground. They didn't hear the sound of a head falling and opened their eyes to see. Jack was convinced by Anna's spirit and did not kill her. He put away the knife and left. They went up and saved Anna. As the war wore on, the Japanese began to move them. When the truck passed by the compound again, they saw their companions inside who were well fed and dressed. Some began to regret not joining them. Then they were transferred to the train again. On the way, some of them fell ill and couldn't hold on. Finally, they were taken to a new concentration camp. In fact, it was just a few broken houses. The floor was covered with broken bricks and tiles. Here they had to be self-sufficient. They had to repair the houses and do the work. When there was nothing to eat, they would eat what they could catch: steaks, fries, and anything else they could eat. Those who couldn't hold on slowly fell down. The number of graves in the camp grew. They ate the snails they found when they were too hungry. Finally, on that day, the Japanese officers came and announced that the war was over. Japan had lost the war and they could all go home. Then the Japanese came out of the camp and all of them cried with joy. They hugged each other and celebrated, and then they returned home. The women and children were sent to Singapore and Jakarta for medical treatment. It took 2 weeks for the Allied soldiers to reach Sumatra, the most remote concentration camp in the world. Their memories made this film possible. Many of them are still alive today. The survivors' lifelong friendships. In the harsh conditions of the camp, their spontaneous choir, this gave them hope to live and let them persevere until the arrival of victory.